Hello, AP students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 8, Emotion and Motivation, Part 3, Emotional Control. And to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligences. Peter Slavovsky and John Mayer kind of came up with this concept. And for the most part, emotional intelligence is kind of a relatively new area, but it is the ability to understand and control emotional responses. And those with high emotional intelligence are tuned into their own feelings and emotions and those of others, and they can learn to control their or manage their negative feelings. So in a way, there's some different things that kind of feed into this self-awareness, being able to kind of be in tune to what's happening with your emotions, self-management, meaning that you're able to use some self-control, you can adapt. There's some achievement orientation, which we're going to talk a little bit about, your positive outlook, social awareness, that you show empathy, but you have an organizational awareness, and then the management of it, the influence that you can have, the ability to coach and mentor, to manage conflict, to build teamwork, and to be an inspirational leader. All those are really kind of the things that kind of encompass emotional intelligence. And what's interesting is, unlike, IQ, which, for the most part, you can sit down and take a pencil paper test and improve that. Um, it's a little harder to assess, basically emotional intelligence. But there are maybe some different things that can be used, and we can use some predictive powers of that. And hence, we have the marshmallow test. Walter Mischel and Ebby Ebbetson of Stanford University developed this many years ago. And in a way, it was an opportunity to test and to see whether or not a person could delay gratification. And what they did is they gave a 4-year-old one marshmallow, and they told the subject if they waited to eat it, then they would receive two. And the subjects who waited did better later on in life because they could handle things like frustration and stress. And hence, there's evidence that they did better on standardized tests like the SAT, and that they had good relationships. So, individuals who are maybe a little more um, impulsive, could be a tad bit more stubborn and indecisive, might suffer low self-esteem, might be a little mistrusting, could be easily provoked by frustration. Emotional intelligence is not a perfect predictor of success, but it might show us that there's some evidence that it could be linked to success. So we're going to talk a little bit about detecting deception. And we're going to talk a little bit about deception cues. And I want you to take a look at these sets of photos that I have here. We have somebody who is basically authentically smiling and someone who's kind of fake smiling in either one of these pictures. And the thing here is to look at things like the eye. You might also listen to the spoken word and looking at other body language cues. So we'll start with the eyes. Evident dilation of the eyes kind of suggests that one is a little bit more authentic than the other. A genuine grin typically leads to the skin nearer the eyes crinkling up. And truth, for the most part, you can look in the eyes, supposedly, to see those kind of things. When we talk about spoken word, individuals who take long pauses in speech to choose their words carefully, or to kind of manage speech errors, probably have a tendency that they're hiding something. They're a little more constrained in their movement and their gestures. They could also suffer some posture shifts, nervous gesturing, shrugging of the shoulders. All of those kind of things might suggest that a person is trying to deceive you or trying to lie or to hide the truth. As far as trying to test for deception, we've had for many years polygraphs. Polygraph is, sometimes also known as the lie detector. What does it do? It's a device that records or graphs many measures of physical arousal. So we're looking at things like heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, perspiration. And the polygrapher, the person who's administering this, will ask a lot of loaded questions, but they'll start off evidently with some things that are kind of like kind of benchmark items, like uh, asking a person's name, asking them some general questions about where they live, that kind of stuff. And what they're doing is they're establishing a baseline, and then as they ask these provoking emotional questions, they're looking for any major changes. And so if there's a spike in blood pressure or breathing, heart rate, that might show us that somebody is trying to work harder to deceive. Sometimes irrelevant questions will come up. Control questions will be asked, like, did you ever lie to your parents? They're designed to elicit an anxious, emotional, aroused response pattern. And for the most part, the examiner can compare these two. Though I will say this, anytime that we talk about polygraphs, they're not 100% accurate. Sometimes people who have been falsely accused of lying when they haven't. And then there's some people who took the polygraph who were lying and weren't even necessarily caught. So, needless to say, the United States Congress outlawed most uses of polygraph tests in industry and government. Only about half of the states actually use this as evidence within the courts. So, needless to say, it's not necessarily something that you're going to probably use as evidence in a courtroom, but you might see it on a TV show. So, there are alternative approaches to deception detection, things like integrity tests, such as kind of a pencil paper test, asking people certain questions. They're not necessarily foolproof by any means. You can use brain scans. There are certain brainwave patterns that are kind of linked to fibbing. Chances are you probably have to use an EEG to monitor that. You could use an fMRI that might show active or lying areas within the brain that when we are lying, they activate certain areas. But sometimes that can also be used to also indicate when somebody's trying to tell the truth. Controlling anger, which is not necessarily always easy to do. Aggression, for the most part, accompanies anger only about 10% of the time. And most people feel angry a few times a week and manage to keep their anger in balance. I mean, I think frustration is normal, but it's when we go from being frustrated to rage that it becomes a little bit inappropriate. Anger episodes that occur frequently to the point of being a personality trait are pathological and are in need of treatment. In other words, it's showing us maybe a personality flaw, and hence that can be problematic. Violence, for the most part, causes harm to anyone, and it's never really normal or accepted. Learning to express anger safely is important. This is kind of the work of Melvin Fine's integrated anger management, and the whole idea is to identify the underlying source of one's anger, understanding where that's coming from, letting go of the unrealistic goals that feed into anger, such as the naive belief that expressing anger will motivate others to do the right thing. So, like when you get really mad, that's going to motivate other people to shape up. That doesn't always work, and it actually can backfire against you. Venting one's anger has a tendency to increase the tendency of other people becoming enraged. So, trying to, supposedly get it off your chest by aggressively confronting or hurting that individual is likely not to end the feud, but actually to fuel it and keep it going. So, you know, you got to think about how you manage those kind of things. Saner approach would be to keep your feelings to yourself and not necessarily venting everything out in public. And in a way, that would also include things like social media. All right. Thank you very much.